Marcus Chun had always believed that the most dangerous thing in the galaxy wasn't the radiation storms that could fry your ship's electronics, or the pirates who haunted the outer rim trade routes, or even the corporate enforcers who'd space you for being behind on payments. No, the most dangerous thing was hope. Hope was what killed salvage runners like him. Hope that the next derelict would contain something valuable enough to change their luck. Hope that somewhere in the endless black, there was a score big enough to buy freedom from the crushing debt that kept them flying coffin ships through the most dangerous sectors of known space. But when Marcus's proximity alarms started screaming as he approached the twisted wreckage of what had once been a Terran Federation cruiser, he felt that familiar flutter in his chest. The ship had been drifting for decades, picked clean by countless salvagers before him. He was only here for a single part, a thermal regulator that would keep his own ship from cooking him alive in the next solar storm. What he found instead would shatter everything he thought he knew about humanity's place in the universe, and prove that sometimes, just sometimes, hope was the only thing standing between survival and extinction. The girl hiding in the cargo bay wasn't human, but the terror in her eyes when she saw him, that was universal. Marcus Chin's salvage ship, the Lucky Strike, groaned like an old man's bones as it drifted toward the derelict Federation cruiser. The proximity sensors painted the wreckage in harsh green lines on his display, a kilometer-long tomb that had been spinning slowly through the void for 37 years. The ship's designation, barely visible through the scoring of micrometeorite impacts, read TFS Meridian. Every salvager in the outer territories knew the Meridian story. She'd been part of the Fifth Fleet when humanity first encountered the Kethvar Collective, back when Earth still thought they were the only intelligent species in the galaxy. The battle had lasted 18 hours. When it was over, the Meridian was the only human vessel left intact, though intact was a generous term for something with half its hull missing and no life support. The official reports said all hands were lost. The unofficial stories whispered by drunk spacers in frontier bars painted a different picture, one of desperate last stands and impossible heroism that had somehow convinced the Kethvar to retreat despite their overwhelming victory. Marcus had always figured the truth was somewhere in between, which meant the ship had been picked clean decades ago. But he wasn't here for treasure. His thermal regulator was dying, and the next solar storm was only 6 days out. The Meridian was the last ship of her class within range, and her environmental systems would have the exact component he needed. It was a simple job. Get in, find the part, get out before something went wrong. Things always went wrong. Marcus guided the Lucky Strike toward the gaping wound in the cruiser's starboard side, using minimal thrust to avoid disturbing the delicate balance that kept the wreck from tumbling into pieces. His ship was barely 40 meters long, a converted cargo hauler that looked like a rust bucket, but flew like a dream when properly motivated. Beside the Meridian, she looked like a gnat approaching a sleeping giant. The docking went smoother than expected. Marcus found a relatively stable section where he could mag-clamp his ship without worrying about the whole structure giving way. The Meridian's artificial gravity had failed decades ago, but her backup power was still running off emergency batteries that would outlast the heat death of the universe. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow that made shadows dance in his peripheral vision. Marcus suited up in his environmental gear, not a proper EVA suit, just a rebreather mask and basic protection against decompression. The Meridian's atmosphere had leaked away years ago, but the ship wasn't completely airless. Pockets of gas trapped in sealed compartments created a thin, breathable mixture that wouldn't kill him as long as he didn't push it too hard. The first thing that struck him as he crossed from his ship into the derelict was the silence. Not the absence of sound. Space was always silent, but the absence of the subtle vibrations and background hums that marked a living ship. The Meridian felt dead in a way that went beyond mere mechanical failure. It felt abandoned by more than just its crew. Marcus activated his helmet light and began making his way through the twisted corridors toward what his ship's computer had identified as the environmental control section. The emergency lighting system flickered occasionally, casting bizarre shadows that made him jump at his own reflection in shattered viewports. Debris floated everywhere, personal effects, broken equipment, and things he tried not to look at too closely. The environmental section was 3 decks down and halfway across the ship. Marcus moved carefully, testing each handhold before trusting his weight to it. The Meridian had been built to last, but 37 years of cosmic radiation and thermal cycling had weakened her internal structure. He'd heard stories of salvagers falling through deck plating that looked solid but crumbled like paper at the first touch. As he moved deeper into the ship, Marcus began to notice things that didn't match the official reports. Blast marks on the walls that pointed inward rather than out. Emergency bulkheads that had been manually sealed from the inside. Most disturbing of all, the complete absence of human remains in areas where the crew should have made their last stand. The environmental control center was exactly where it should be, and, miracle of miracles, the thermal regulators were still in place. Marcus spent 20 minutes carefully removing the component he needed, a device about the size of his fist that would keep his ship's life support running for another 5 years if he was lucky. The work was tedious in zero gravity, but he'd done similar jobs hundreds of times. He was just finishing up when he heard it, a sound that shouldn't exist on a dead ship, a soft scraping, like something moving through the ventilation system. Marcus froze, listening intently. Probably just thermal expansion, he told himself. Dead ships made all sorts of noises as their superstructure settled. The sound came again, definitely not thermal expansion. It was rhythmic, purposeful. Something alive was moving through the ship's air ducts. Marcus's first thought was rats. Ships this old sometimes harbored vermin that had adapted to life in low gravity and thin atmosphere. But the Meridian had been in vacuum for decades. Nothing could have survived that long without a proper life support system, unless something was maintaining one. Marcus clipped the thermal regulator to his belt and drew his sidearm, an ancient plasma pistol that had seen better decades. The weapon was primarily intended for cutting through bulkheads or discouraging pirates, but it would stop most biological threats. He hoped. The scraping sounds were moving away from his position, heading toward the ship's aft sections. Marcus made a decision that he would later recognize as either brilliant or catastrophically stupid. Instead of heading back to his ship, he followed the sounds. The trail led him through a maze of maintenance corridors and emergency passages that even the ship's computer didn't have mapped. Someone had modified the Meridian's internal structure, creating a network of hidden spaces that wouldn't show up on any standard scan. The work was crude, but effective. Whoever had done it understood both human engineering and the ship's specific design limitations. Marcus found himself in a section of the ship that should have been completely destroyed in the battle. The hull showed massive damage from the outside, but someone had rigged emergency bulkheads and portable atmosphere processors to create a small pocket of livable space. Jury-rigged power conduits snaked along the walls, feeding off the ship's emergency systems. It was a masterpiece of improvised engineering, and it was clearly occupied. Personal effects were scattered throughout the improvised habitat. A sleeping area made from salvaged padding and emergency blankets. Food containers that looked Terran but bore markings Marcus didn't recognize. Most intriguingly, a collection of books and data tablets that suggested someone had been living here for years, possibly decades. The scraping sound came again, much closer now. Marcus spun around, plasma pistol raised, and found himself face to face with the most impossible thing he'd ever seen. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old, with pale skin marked by intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move in the dim light. Her hair was white as starlight, floating around her head in the zero gravity like a silver halo. But it was her eyes that stopped Marcus cold, large, luminous, and filled with a terror so profound it made his chest ache. She wasn't human. The proportions were wrong, the features too sharp, the way she moved too fluid for terrestrial evolution. But there was something undeniably familiar about her, something that spoke to the deepest parts of Marcus's brain and whispered that this was a person, regardless of species. They stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then, the girl did something that shattered every assumption Marcus had about alien contact. She spoke. Please, she whispered in perfect, unaccented Terran standard. Don't hurt me. Marcus lowered his weapon, mind reeling. The official records were clear. Humanity's first contact with alien intelligence had been with the HFY Collective 37 years ago. There had never been any mention of other species, certainly none that looked remotely human or spoke human languages. I'm not going to hurt you, Marcus said carefully. What are you doing here? How long have you been on this ship? The girl's eyes darted toward what Marcus now realized was an escape route, a carefully concealed opening in the bulkhead that probably led to another part of her hidden habitat. She was calculating whether she could run before he could stop her. My name is Marcus, he continued, holstering his weapon. I'm a salvager. I just came here for a part. I didn't know anyone was living here. Salvager. The girl's voice was soft, musical. You take things from dead ships? Sometimes, when I need them to keep my own ship running. Marcus gestured around the makeshift habitat. This is incredible work. Did you do this yourself? The question seemed to surprise her. Father taught me. Before. She trailed off, and Marcus saw her eyes fill with something that might have been tears. Before what? Before the others found us. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's ambient temperature. Others? You mean there are more of your people? The girl shook her head violently. No, not my people. The ones who hunt us. The ones who killed my father. She was backing toward her escape route now, clearly preparing to bolt. Marcus raised his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. Wait, he said. If someone's hunting you, maybe I can help. My ship isn't much, but she's fast. I could take you somewhere safe. The girl stopped moving, studying his face with those impossibly large eyes. Why would you help me? You don't even know what I am. It was a good question, and Marcus wasn't sure he had a good answer. Maybe it was the way she'd said please in the voice of someone who expected to be refused. Maybe it was the craftsmanship of her hidden home, which spoke to a mind that was both brilliant and desperate. Maybe it was just that he'd spent too many years alone in the black, and the thought of leaving another living being to face the darkness alone was more than he could bear. Because you're afraid, he said finally. And because whoever did this to you, whoever killed your father, they're probably not the good guys. The girl considered this for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. My name is Lyra, she said. And if you truly wish to help me, we need to leave this place immediately. They will have detected your ship's arrival. They are already coming. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice water as Lyra's words sank in. They're coming? Who's coming? How do you know? Lyra was already moving, gathering items from around the hidden habitat with practiced efficiency. The monitoring systems father installed. They detect any ship that approaches within 50 kilometers. She gestured toward a collection of jury-rigged sensors and displays that Marcus had initially dismissed as scrap electronics. Your vessel triggered them 47 minutes ago. 47 minutes, Marcus repeated, his mind racing. How long do we have? If they are using standard patrol craft, approximately 18 minutes before they arrive. Less if they have been waiting nearby. Lyra stuffed what looked like data storage devices into a makeshift bag. We must go. Now. Marcus grabbed her arm as she started toward her escape route. Wait, you can't just. Who are these people? What do they want with you? Lyra turned to face him. And, in the dim emergency lighting, Marcus saw that her eyes weren't just large, they were compound, with subtle faceted surfaces that caught and reflected light like a cat's. The patterns on her skin weren't tattoos or birthmarks, but some kind of natural chromatophore system that responded to her emotional state. Right now, they were pulsing with rapid, agitated colors that spoke of fear and urgency. They are hunters, she said. They track my kind across the galaxy, collecting us for purposes I do not fully understand. My father, and I have been running from them for most of my life. Your kind. Marcus's mind struggled to process this information. How many species are out there? The official reports only mention the HFY. Your government knows of perhaps a dozen species, Lyra said, still gathering her belongings. The reality is that there are hundreds. Most avoid your people because humanity is aggressive. Unpredictable. Aggressive. Marcus felt a spike of defensive anger. We're not the ones hunting refugees through derelict ships. Lyra paused in her packing and looked at him with something that might have been pity. Marcus, the beings hunting me are human. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. That's impossible. Humans don't. We've never encountered anyone like you before. Haven't you? Lyra's voice was gentle, but insistent. Tell me, How many frontier colonies have gone silent over the past 50 years? How many exploration vessels have simply disappeared without sending distress signals? How many times have your military forces found evidence of technology that doesn't match any known human or KFR specifications? Marcus opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Even a salvager who spent most of his time in the Outer Rim heard stories. Entire settlements that stopped responding to communications. Scout ships that vanished without a trace. Pirates using weapons that seemed decades ahead of anything in the official tech databases. The Terran Federation has a black operations division, Lyra continued. They call themselves the Xenological Research Consortium. Officially, they study alien technology for defensive purposes. Unofficially, they capture and experiment on any non-human intelligence they can find. Marcus wanted to say it was impossible, but the word died in his throat. He'd seen enough of humanity's darker impulses during his years on the frontier. If aliens existed and were vulnerable, there would inevitably be humans willing to exploit that vulnerability. How do you know all this? Because they captured my father when I was a child. He escaped, but not before learning what they were doing. We have been running ever since. Lyra finished packing and moved toward the concealed exit. He chose this ship because it was supposedly empty, forgotten. He thought we would be safe here. How long has it been? Since he was captured, 15 years. I was 5 when it happened. Lyra activated a hidden panel, revealing a passage that led deeper into the ship's modified structure. Father spent the rest of his life trying to warn other species, trying to organize some kind of resistance. But my people are not warriors. We are scholars, artists, healers. We have no defense against human military technology. Marcus followed her into the passage, his mind reeling. The implications were staggering. If Lyra was telling the truth, then humanity had been engaged in a secret war of genocide for decades, and the general population had no idea it was happening. Wait, he said suddenly. You said your father is dead. What happened to him? Lyra stopped moving for a moment, and the patterns on her skin shifted to deep blues and purples. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. He died 3 months ago. Age, mostly. My people do not live as long as humans. But also stress, fear, the constant running. She resumed moving through the passage. I have been alone since then, trying to maintain the systems he built, waiting for. I don't know what I was waiting for. And now I've led them right to you. Marcus felt a crushing weight of guilt settle on his shoulders. I'm sorry. If I'd known. You could not have known, Lyra interrupted. And, in truth, I cannot remain here much longer anyway. The ship's emergency power is failing. Father estimated I had perhaps 6 more months before the life support systems shut down completely. They emerged into another section of the modified habitat, this one clearly designed as a workshop. Marcus saw evidence of sophisticated technical work, circuit boards that combined human and alien components, power cells that had been rewired to provide more efficiency than their original specifications, and, most impressively, what appeared to be a prototype communications array. Your father was an engineer? Among other things. My people are generalists by nature. We believe that specialization leads to stagnation. Lyra moved to the communications array and began powering it down. But, yes, he was particularly gifted with technology. Much of what you see here is his work. Marcus studied the hybrid technology with growing amazement. This is incredible. The power efficiency alone could revolutionize ship design. And these communications modifications, you could send messages across half the galaxy with this setup. Father often said that human technology had tremendous potential, but that humans lacked the patience for true innovation. You build things to work adequately, not optimally. Lyra disconnected the last of the power cables. He spent years trying to improve on your designs. Did he ever consider sharing his improvements? Officially. Through proper channels. The look Lyra gave him was answer enough. Marcus, my people are being systematically hunted and experimented upon by your government. Do you truly believe they would welcome technological collaboration? Point taken. Marcus helped Lyra gather the portable components of her father's work, though he suspected they'd never be able to transport more than a fraction of it. The thought of leaving behind such revolutionary technology made his salvager's heart ache, but there was no choice. Where will you go, he asked. If we get out of here, I don't know. Lyra's chromatophores showed deep uncertainty, swirling patterns of gray and brown that spoke of confusion and despair. Father had contacts, safe houses, hidden bases, but I was never told their locations. He said it was too dangerous for me to know. Marcus was about to suggest they figure it out later when the Lucky Strike's proximity alarms began screaming through his comm system. The sound was faint, but unmistakable, multiple contacts approaching fast. They're here, Lyra said unnecessarily. She was already moving toward another hidden passage. This way. There is an emergency exit near your ship's docking point. They ran through a maze of modified corridors and improvised passages, Lyra leading with the confidence of someone who'd spent months memorizing every inch of the route. Marcus struggled to keep up, hampered by the low gravity and his unfamiliarity with the terrain. Behind them, he could hear the distant vibrations of docking clamps engaging as the hunting ships connected to the Meridian's hull. How many ships? Marcus gasped as they climbed through a vertical shaft that bypassed 3 decks of damaged superstructure. At least 4, probably more. Lyra moved through the zero-gravity environment with fluid grace, using handholds and guide cables that were almost invisible in the dim lighting. They travel in packs when hunting. One ship to pursue, others to cut off escape routes. They reached the emergency exit just as Marcus heard the first sounds of movement from the main corridors. Heavy boots, multiple sets, moving with military precision. The hunters had boarded the Meridian and were conducting a systematic search. The exit opened onto a maintenance bay that connected to the section where Marcus had docked his ship. The Lucky Strike was exactly where he'd left her, mag clamps still secure, but Marcus could see other ships through the nearby hull breaches, sleek, predatory vessels that looked like military hardware painted in civilian colors. Can your ship outrun them? Lyra asked as they crossed toward the Lucky Strike's airlock. Marcus ran a quick mental calculation. His ship was fast and maneuverable, but she was also old and running on patch systems. The hunting ships looked new, well-maintained, purpose-built for their task. Probably not in a straight chase, he admitted. But the outer rim is full of asteroid fields and navigation hazards. If we can reach the Kepler belt, I know some hiding spots. The belt is 6 hours away at maximum burn. They will catch us long before then. Then, we'll have to be creative. Marcus palmed the Lucky Strike's airlock control and gestured for Lyra to go first. I've been running contraband through these sectors for 15 years. I know a few tricks. As Lyra boarded his ship, Marcus took one last look at the Meridian. Somewhere in her twisted corridors, the hunters were discovering the empty habitat, the abandoned workshop, the evidence that their quarry had been living right under their noses for months. They would be angry, frustrated, and more determined than ever to complete their mission. Marcus sealed the airlock and headed for the bridge. Time to see if an old salvage runner could teach some military hotshots a thing or two about flying in dangerous space. Strap in. He called to Lyra as he began the startup sequence. This is going to get interesting. The Lucky Strike's engines came online with their familiar low rumble. Marcus disengaged the mag clamps and backed away from the Meridian with delicate precision. No point in alerting the hunters to their escape until absolutely necessary. They made it almost a full kilometer before the first pursuit ship cleared the Derelict and came after them. Contact bearing 27 Mark IV. Lyra reported from the co-pilot station, apparently familiar enough with human ship systems to read the displays. They're hailing us on standard frequencies. Let them talk to empty space, Marcus muttered, pushing the engines to full power. How many more ships? 3 confirmed. Possibly more that haven't cleared the Derelict yet. Lyra's voice was steady despite the circumstances. Marcus, these are not random hunters. The coordination, the equipment, this is a military operation. Marcus nodded grimly. He'd reached the same conclusion. The Xenological Research Consortium wasn't just some rogue Black Ops program. This was an organized, well-funded effort with significant resources and government backing, which meant that helping Lyra escape wasn't just a humanitarian gesture. It was an act of treason against his own species. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, as the Lucky Strike raced toward the dubious safety of the asteroid belt with 4 pursuit ships closing the distance, Marcus found himself smiling. After 15 years of scraping by on salvage runs and freight hauls, he finally had a cause worth fighting for. The first plasma bolt missed the Lucky Strike by less than 50 meters, close enough for Marcus to feel the heat wash through the ship's hull. Warning alarms screamed across the bridge as the weapon's fire ionized the sparse gases surrounding the Meridian, creating a brief aurora of deadly beauty in the void. They're not trying to disable us, Marcus observed, throwing the ship into a wild evasive pattern that would have torn apart anything with a less flexible superstructure. They're shooting to kill. Lyra's chromatophores had shifted to rapid pulses of deep red and orange, colors that needed no translation. They cannot allow me to escape. I know too much about their operations. What exactly do you know? Marcus yanked the ship into a spiraling dive toward the Meridian's superstructure, using the Derelict as cover while he plotted their escape route. I mean specifically, what could you tell people that they're willing to commit murder to prevent? Locations, personnel, the scope of their activities. Lyra's hands danced across the co-pilot's controls with surprising familiarity. Father kept detailed records. Names, dates, testimonies from survivors. Evidence of experiments conducted on captured beings. Marcus felt his stomach clench. Experiments. Medical research. Attempts to weaponize alien biology. Interrogation techniques designed to break non-human psychology. Lyra's voice remained steady, but the colors flowing across her skin told a different story. My father was subjected to some of these procedures before he escaped. He never forgot what was done to him, or to the others who didn't survive. Another plasma bolt scorched past them, this one closer than the first. Marcus pushed the Lucky Strike through a gap in the Meridian's broken superstructure that was barely wider than a ship's hull. The pursuing vessels were forced to break formation, buying precious seconds. How long have they been doing this? Marcus asked, weaving between the twisted metal spars that protruded from the Derelict's wounds. The consortium was established shortly after first contact with the Kethvar. Your military leaders realized that humanity was not alone in the galaxy, and decided that other species represented either resources to be exploited or threats to be eliminated. That's insane. The technological benefits of peaceful contact alone would require sharing power with alien civilizations that might be more advanced than humanity, Lyra interrupted. The consortium's founders believed it was better to take what they wanted through force. Marcus pulled the Lucky Strike clear of the Derelict and pushed the engines to maximum burn. The ship responded like a thoroughbred given its head, acceleration pressing them back into their seats as they raced toward the dubious safety of open space. Behind them, the pursuit ships cleared the Meridian's superstructure and resumed the chase. Contact at 7,000 kilometers and closing, Lyra reported. Their ships are definitely faster than ours. In a straight line, maybe. Marcus activated his navigation computer and began plotting a course through the Kepler belt's outer edge. But speed isn't everything in this business. The asteroid field appeared on their screens as a dense cloud of contacts, thousands of rocky bodies ranging in size from pebbles to small moons. Most civilian pilots avoided the belt entirely, considering it an unpredictable death trap. Military vessels had the sensors and computing power to navigate it safely, but only at reduced speeds that would neutralize their pursuit advantage. You're taking us into the asteroids? Lyra's chromatophores showed swirling patterns of alarm. Is that wise? Probably not, Marcus admitted. But it's the only chance we've got. The first asteroids rushed past them like bullets, their irregular surfaces scarred by eons of mutual bombardment. Marcus cut the engines to minimum thrust and activated the ship's passive sensors, relying on gravitational readings and thermal imaging to navigate the maze of stone and metal. Behind them, the pursuit ships were forced to slow down as well, their formation spreading out to avoid collisions. Military discipline was keeping them together, but Marcus could see the frustration in their flight patterns. They're good, he murmured, watching the tactical display. Professional, patient. They know they've got us trapped. Perhaps, Lyra said. But they do not know the belt as you do. Marcus glanced at her in surprise. How did you know that? The way you fly. The confidence in your voice when you mentioned hiding spots. Lyra's patterns had shifted to something that might have been admiration. You have spent time here before. 5 years, actually. Marcus guided them through a cluster of smaller asteroids, using their gravitational shadows to mask the ship's heat signature. I was running medical supplies to the mining colonies during the plague outbreak. Officially, the sector was under quarantine. Unofficially, people were dying because the corporate medical providers wouldn't risk their ships. You saved lives. I tried to. Lost more ships than I care to count in the process. Marcus's voice took on a bitter edge. Turns out that doing the right thing is expensive. That's how I ended up in salvage work. A massive asteroid drifted past their starboard side, its surface pocked with mining installations that had been abandoned for decades. Marcus had used the hollowed-out facilities as a base of operations during the plague years, and he still remembered the hidden entrance to the main shaft. Hold on, he warned Lyra. We're going to disappear. The Lucky Strike dove toward the asteroid's surface, following a course that looked suicidally reckless, but actually followed a precisely calculated approach vector. At the last possible second, Marcus triggered a burst from the maneuvering thrusters and slipped the ship through an opening that was barely visible against the rock's mottled surface. They found themselves in a natural cavern that had been expanded by the mining operation. The space was large enough to hold a dozen ships the size of the Lucky Strike, but from the outside it would appear to be nothing more than another crater on the asteroid's surface. Marcus cut the engines and activated the ship's stealth systems, such as they were. The Lucky Strike wasn't a military vessel, but 15 years of avoiding customs inspectors and corporate security had taught him a few tricks about hiding in plain sight. Will they find us here? Lyra asked, studying the cavern walls through the viewport. Eventually. But it'll take time, and they can't search every asteroid in the belt. With luck, they'll assume we kept running and move their search pattern further out. They waited in the darkness, watching their sensors for signs of the pursuit ships. The hunters were still out there, methodically checking every possible hiding spot, but their search pattern was indeed moving away from the asteroid cluster where Marcus had hidden. After an hour of tense silence, Lyra spoke. Marcus, why are you doing this? You could have taken your part and left the Meridian. You could have pretended you never saw me. It was a fair question, and Marcus found himself struggling to answer it. The smart thing, the safe thing, would have been to walk away. He had his thermal regulator, his ship was running well, and he could have been halfway to the next salvage site by now. I used to have a daughter, he said finally. Emily. She'd be about your age now, if she'd lived. Lyra's patterns shifted to softer colors, blues and greens that seemed to express sympathy. What happened to her? Plague. Same one I was running supplies for. Marcus stared out at the asteroid field, but he was seeing different stars, a different time. Her mother and I were divorced, and Emily was living on New Geneva when the outbreak started. By the time I could arrange transport, it was too late. I'm sorry. The point is, I know what it's like to be helpless. To watch someone you care about die because the people with power decided their lives weren't worth the risk. Marcus turned to face Lyra, noting how her alien features somehow managed to convey very human emotions. When I saw you in that makeshift home, afraid and alone, I couldn't just walk away. Emily would have expected better from me. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, monitoring the tactical displays as the search pattern moved further away. Finally, Marcus activated the ship's communication array and began scanning for traffic on the standard salvage frequencies. What are you doing? Lyra asked. Looking for help. I know some people in this sector, other salvagers, independent traders, miners. People who don't have much love for government authority. Marcus fine-tuned the receiver, searching for the coded signals that indicated friendly traffic. If we're going to get you to safety, we'll need allies. And, you trust these people? With my life. Which is exactly what I'll be doing if this goes wrong. Marcus found the frequency he was looking for and began composing a carefully coded message. There's a trader named Sarah Kim who runs medical supplies to the outer colonies. She's got connections throughout the independent systems, and she's not afraid to bend a few rules when the situation calls for it. The response came back within minutes, a brief acknowledgement followed by coordinates for a meeting point in the Titan Nebula. Sarah was interested in talking, but she wanted to meet in neutral space where both parties could be sure they weren't walking into a trap. She'll help us, Lyra asked. If she can. Sarah's got a good heart, but she's also got bills to pay and a crew to think about. We'll need to convince her that helping you is worth the risk. Marcus began plotting a course to the rendezvous point, using back routes and minor shipping lanes that would keep them away from the main traffic patterns. The journey would take 18 hours, assuming they could avoid the search teams that were undoubtedly spreading throughout the sector. There's something else, Lyra said as they prepared to leave their hiding spot. Something I haven't told you about the consortium. Marcus felt a chill of apprehension. What? They don't just hunt individuals like me.